Originally a cheap, plentiful, and man-made substitute for ivory, celluloid, one of the earliest of plastics, made its way into the manufacture of novelties. But it had one serious defect. It could burn.
Welcome to the Kill It With Fire podcast, where each episode, a group of creative practitioners and academics from different disciplines takes a look at cult, neglected or overlooked motion pictures from the last few decades of celluloid, when movies were films.
Crom! All together now? Crom!
Crom.
Yeah, Crom. The most powerful legend of all is back in a new adventure. This is a tagline for the film. There's a lot more on the poster. I'm not reading the rest of it. This is a tagline for the film that we're looking at today, which is Richard Fleischer's Conan the Destroyer, the sequel to John Milius's Conan the Barbarian, made in 1984, just prior to. I always thought this was after. For some reason, in that sort of timeline of Schwarzenegger's career that I've got, in my head, I was remember this as being after the Terminator, but it wasn't. It was a film that he made directly before. Should we have a round of introduction, chaps? Mark, would you like to go first?
Yes, I'm Mark Hall, full-time father, aspiring writer.
Fantastic. AD?
Hello, I'm Adrian Mills. I teach games at the Tech Partnership.
Where's that?
Who knows? It's the East Coast Partnership. So that's what I do. I teach games, and I also cast on this podcast. Is that the term now? Is that the verb? I don't know. Cast,
talk, spiel. I don't know. Anything you like. That's fantastic. Thanks, AD. Pete.
Cool. Yeah, Peter True, writer. Lecturer,
raconteur, bon vivant,
je ne sais quoi.
Viewer of Peter O'Toole films.
Yeah.
Del Boy.
Scam artist. No.
Oh, poor Pete.
Oh, sorry, Peter. Paul Lewis, I think today I'm going to be a barbarian and a destroyer. Or shall I be a destroyer first? Or barbarian? I don't know.
Well, one is clearly
better barbarian
than the other.
first.
I'm flexing my pecs as we speak.
If you're a destroyer first, then there's nothing left to be a barbarian with, is there?
Wow.
Destroyed everything.
I think you've thought too much about that, Mark. You probably thought more about that than the guy that wrote the screenplay for this probably thought about, adapting the story idea to the screen. Anyway, let's move swiftly on. AD, this was your pick. Would you like to provide us with a synopsis of Conan the Destroyer, please?
Certainly, with pleasure. So, fresh on the heels of the Barbarian, Conan finds himself with less clothes.
That's a key plot point there.
It is, and in the company of a stupid sidekick. Who's a poor man's Subutai. So I'm not quite sure. Malak, yes, I'm not quite sure.
J.C. Walter.
He is, but it reminded me. The problem with this sort of thing is it reminded me more of Judge Dredd, the Stallone one, and Rob Schneider. And that's never a good thing to be reminded of. I know this came way before it, but no, I don't want to be reminded of that. Anyway, Conan finds himself with less clothes and praying at a shrine for his lost Valeria, which is not the Pixies song. No. So along comes Queen Tiramisu, played by Sarah Douglas. It's Queen Taramis, sorry. Queen Taramis. Played by Sarah Douglas, who said why fits the film better. Who throws, for no reason, a series of a group of men at Conan, who Conan dispatches with alarming ease by thrusting his sword into the screen a lot,
and punching horses.
And at this point, and Queen Taramis then, they stop fighting after they're all dead. And just says, offers him his wildest dreams, which is to have Valeria back if he'll go and get accompany. What is it? The princess? What's her name? Princess Jenna. To go get the horn of Dagoth. To awaken the sleeping god Dagoth. What ensues is a series of adventures as Conan increases their group. They take along Bombarta, who is Prince Jenna's guard, I guess,
Yeah,
or overseer Wilt Chamberlain.
Wilt Chamberlain.
They pick up Grace Jones, who plays Zula. They pick up the wizard, who now has a name.
A different name.
He does, yeah. He's now Akiro. He's actually just a wizard in the first one. I don't think he had a name.
The Wizard of the Mound. Yeah.
Yeah. So now he's Akiro the wizard. He's become named. So they pick up these characters. They go off on a quest. They fight Pat Roach in a hall of mirrors. They get the horn. They come back. Yeah, absolutely.
And they fight Andre the Giant as well.
Andre the Giant. Yes, they fight these people.
I missed that.
He's the thing under the rubber, I think.
Yeah. Dagoth.
What?
Is he Dagoth?
Yeah, he's Dagoth. Yeah.
Because it says in this thing, Dagoth was controlled by special effects people.
Yeah, well, there were shots with Dagoth where it's clearly Andre the Giant in a rubber suit, but then there was sort of animatronics stuff.
Oh, it makes it even worse. Yeah. Anyway, so they get the horn, they get double crossed, they come back. I know I'm going to keep saying that, by the way. That was in a Sega game. Just as an aside, there's a Sega game on the Dreamcast called 18 Wheeler. Yeah. And you had to park the truck in the first one. And the first reward you got upon parking the truck successfully, you just blurted out, "You got the horn," which always used to make me laugh.
The games come a long way since parking trucks.
But they have.
But this horn in Conan, I mean, I've got it in my notes, and I don't think it's a stretch, but it's a very sinewy, phallic horn.
Oh, it is, absolutely, yes. There's no getting around the fact that they wanted a 14-year-old girl, salivating over a big horn.
Yeah, we'll come on to that.
Behind the production, they're probably giggling into their, whatever, their coffee. So they go back, they take this horn back, they chuck it. Conan and the band get double-crossed. They shove the horn in the sleeping god. The whole point is that they've got to sacrifice the princess so that the good god will arise. I'm never quite clear on this. Would the good god arise if
I think it's so they can control Dagoth.
So they can control him, sort of thing.
The prophecy says that he will run rampant, I think, unless the virgin is sacrificed.
Unless the virgin is sacrificed. He doesn't get sacrificed. He gets up. He turns into a big wobbly thing. Conan has a fight with him and rips the horn back out. Hey, everyone happy. Queen Tiramisu is killed. Bombata is killed. All the bad guys get killed, and then
the throne room from Star Wars at the end.
Yeah, we do have the throne room from Star Wars. Yes, as Queen Jenna, Princess Jenna becomes Queen Jenna, and that's it. It's much more of a basic quest film. It's typical fantasy fare. And I think that kind of covers it. Anyone got anything they want to add, Paul?
Well, I mean, it reminds me. I mean, rewatching it this time, and I watched it on the big screen again because I got the projector out. But rewatching it this time, the plot reminded me very much of Journey to the West, which you, AD, Pete, you might remember this as Monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah. With the group escorting the princess to the treasure.
Tripitaka, isn't
it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I think it's worth mentioning as well that Tracy Walter only took over the role of Malak because David Lander had his health had deteriorated, so that the cast Tracy Walter. I like Tracy Walter in most things. I mean, he's all right in this, but like you say, it's a bad case of the comedy sidekick.
Peter Lorre with hair, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's some great roles. I mean, Repo Man. I mean, he's great in Repo. Batman as well. He's also very memorable. I think the Tim Burton Batman. I think they even made a Tracy Walter toy, didn't they? Out of his character, when they did the action figures for the Tim Burton Batman.
I really hope so.
I seem to recall a Tracy Walter toy. He was also in Delusion, of course, as a cashier at the which we covered a few episodes back, as the cashier at the bus depot, if you remember. But yeah, I mean, I like Tracy Walter, but I think the comedy sidekick shtick is a bit too much. Maybe we'll talk about that, I think, as we go on. I think it's also worth mentioning that Queen Tiramisu, it's Sarah Douglas.
This is Sarah Douglas, yes. Paul, just before we go on, have you got the agenda for this? Because I can't see it. Have you shared it?
Oh, I have indeed, yes. Let me share it for you. Sorry, I'll just put in the agenda. How formal.
Well, you know what I mean. The plan, the random musings. It helps me focus my thoughts.
I think people listening to this will be shocked and terrified that we actually have.
We don't follow it all the time. We do go off on tangents, but
it's just something nice to look at, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I'm muted because I'm eating leftover chicken wings for breakfast.
Classy. Leftover from when, though, Pete? That's the problem with you.
I've never heard something so sad in my entire life.
Hey, it's glorious.
It's not even what you said, it's the way you said it. When you're editing this, Paul, you should count how many horn entendres we make.
Not even double entendres, just entendre.
Just entendres, yeah.
Do you know what? I've been talking to you and I've been muted.
How have you?
I was wondering why nobody was listening to me. Oh no! Oh, here we go. Right, there we go. I'm unmuted now. Thank heavens for that. Adi, I was just going to say about first encounters. Adi, this was your pick. Would you like to tell us about your first encounter with Conan the Destroyer, please?
Okay, so I was a huge Barbarian fan. I watched that when it first hit video, I guess, in the 1980s. So when would that have been? 83, 84, 85, somewhere around there. The time, the time is muddled back then. So I remember being quite excited for Conan the Destroyer coming to video. So my first encounter with this would have been whenever it was first released on video. My brother would have got it out, and even back then, I remember being, even as a 14, 15-year-old, thinking, there's something not quite right about this, and that's never gone away. In fact, that feeling has deepened as the years have passed. So I was too young to see this at cinema and didn't have access to this, and I don't even know if it came to Grimsby. It very well may have done, but I don't know. But my first encounter with this was when its first release on video, so whenever that was, mid 80s.
Yeah, 85, 86, something like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pete?
Well, I thought that my first encounters with this was when I was young and it was on telly, and there was the promise of perhaps seeing a naked lady, but then I realised we wasn't talking about the first Conan, we was talking about the second one. So yeah, my first encounter was last night.
You've not seen this before?
You never seen it? Good lord.
Crikey. Mac?
Yeah, last night, mate. Come on.
It's
It's the same with every time we do this podcast. Full well I've only watched it last night.
I like to ask. My first encounter, I saw Conan the Barbarian on VHS way back when. Picked up a second-hand VHS, I think, in the 80s, mid-80s, late 80s, maybe from the local second-hand shop, I think it was. But I think my first encounter with Conan the Destroyer, it's not seared into my memory, but I think my first encounter with it was probably on television, I think. Late night ITV, I would imagine. In the late 88, 89, 90, maybe, something like that. I hadn't seen it prior to that, I don't think. So I saw it sort of 6-7 years, maybe 5 or 6 years after it came out at the cinema on television. No doubt, probably chopped to ribbons, I would imagine, because it's quite. I mean, although there's a conscious effort with this film to make a sequel to Conan the Destroyer, and this was the sticking point with Schwarzenegger. He writes quite sort of extensively about this in his one of his autobiographies, Total Recall. One of the sticking points with Dino De Laurentiis, who was the producer, really was that the aim was to make a Conan film that was family friendly. I mean, obviously that cheesed off Schwarzenegger. Who said you don't?
No one wants that, do they?
You don't. Yeah, you don't. You clearly don't understand Conan or the character, or it also.
I don't want any film that's got the word destroyer in the title to be family friendly.
Yeah, I mean, it also cheesed off the guys that wrote the story, which were Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway, who are two comic book writers who really knew the material. And their story was adapted for the screen by Stanley Mann, who sort of tempered it and confused it a bit. I mean, to the extent that Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway both working together wrote a comic book version of the same story, changing some of the characters' names. They were so unhappy with the finished film that they adapted the story into a comic book in 1990 called Conan the Horn of Azoth. And Azoth is the substitution for Dagoth in the film. The only person that it seems wasn't cheesed off really was Richard Fleischer, and who sort of accepted everything that the producers wanted him to do. And Schwarzenegger's kind of said it was because he was in his mid 60s or late 60s at the time, just happy to sort of get work, so he didn't put up a fight and he just sort of rolled over and yeah, let's make a family friendly Conan film. Oh, that's fine, but even despite that, when the film was produced, the film that was made quite clearly isn't very family friendly, at least not by sort of modern standards. I don't think there's quite a lot of gore. Even in the finished film, there are a lot of there's some quite sort of, not as many as in the Barbarian, Conan the Barbarian, but there's some quite grisly beheadings and sort of sword slashes with geezers of blood spurting out and that kind of thing. What they did seem to cut back in the final edit, because it was submitted to the MPAA, and the MPAA said, right, we'll give it an R rating, and the producers wanted a PG. And for this family-friendly audience, and what they did seem to cut out was a scene in which the Queen, Sarah Douglas's character, seduces Conan near the start of the film, in order to persuade him to accept the quest to escort the Princess Jenna. And also they cut back on some of the gore, but even so, it's not. I don't think I'd show this to my kids.
Did they cut out the scene where the Queen eats a hamster? Oh no, that's V, isn't it?
Ah dear, Sarah Douglas, Queen of Villainy in films, in 80s films. But yeah, it's a strange one, this, I think. And in the UK, of course, the BBFC cut out and removed some scenes of animal cruelty, horse trips or horse falls. In that
Conan punching a camel to death.
Yeah, Conan punching horses, Conan punching the camel. Well, the incident with Conan punching the camel is, I think,
there's a callback to Conan the Barbarian, isn't it?
Yeah, because he
drunkenly smacks one, doesn't he?
But yeah, he says they're riding through the village, aren't they? And
he says sorry to it, doesn't he?
Malak encounter the camel, and Malak says, "Doesn't that animal look familiar?" And Conan apologises to the camel,
which makes no sense. Just as an aside, makes no sense because Malak isn't in the first film.
Malak is, but it's David Lander, isn't it?
Malak's not in the first film. Subtitle is.
Subtitle, yeah.
So Malak is nowhere to be seen in the first film, so he wouldn't even know anything about that camel.
Because he probably saw it on VHS.
The camel that
second-hand VHS he got from.
They're drunk in the city, and they're just wandering about, and they're drunk, Subtitle and Conan, and then he bumbles into this camel by accident and smacks it one.
That's right.
And then the people are not too happy with him, and it's a quite dark scene. They're like, "Oh, come, let's leave this place," and whatever. So they go off. But Malak's nowhere to be seen, so he wouldn't recognise the camel unless Conan has punched many camels. He just goes around punching camels. It's like, there's another camel he's punched.
But I take issue with the fact that they'd recognise the camel at all. I mean, it's a camel.
Camels are camels.
They all look very similar.
But it's a callback to the first film that makes no sense.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. The only way it works is if Conan is a serial camel puncher, which is a film I would like to see, Conan the Camel Puncher. I think there's mileage there.
I think that would work. But anyway, Conan apologised.
A new sequel, Conan the Camel Puncher.
I would go see Conan the Camel Puncher. Better than Conan the Destroyer.
It's my new favourite scene. I've seen in Arnold Schwarzenegger in a thong punch a camel.
Yeah, I've digressed. And sorry, I had
that's fine.
After 35 years of being pent up about that camel punching scene.
There could be a sequel to Conan the Camel Puncher, and it could be Conan the Camel Puncher Toe.
What?
Conan the Camel Toe Stubber.
Go back to your chicken.
Yeah, eat your chicken, Pete.
What you were saying about the animal cruelty, though, I did remember thinking within 5 minutes, I was thinking, Peter can't be happy about this. The animal organisation.
I was fine with it.
Thinking there are a lot of horses being thrown around here, aren't there?
I was going to say the thing with the camel, the punching of the camel seems quite innocent. But, I mean, Conan apologises. Conan says, "I'm sorry about what happened last time." The camel spits at Conan. He punches the camel, knocking it down. It seems quite an innocent moment, but how that was achieved was, I think they essentially tripwired the camel. They tied its front hooves, camels have hooves, with a wire, and pulled the camel's front legs out from under it, so it went forwards, which is quite a cruel thing to do to an animal, you know.
Yeah, they did the same in the Barbarian. There's two in the original release of Barbarian. There were two cuts in the battle scenes where horses got tripped up, because they could get away with those things in filming in different countries who had different animal sort of humane laws, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So I think this was filmed, is it in Mexico?
Yeah.
And the first one was Spain, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Barbarian. So there wasn't so much of a worry about doing whatever you wanted with animals, tripping them up. I mean,
yeah. But that
even with imagined, like them saying to Schwarzenegger, "You've got two options. We either trip the camel up," and he goes, "Oh, I don't like the sound of that," or you can fight it. Yeah, trip it up. Yeah. Knock it over.
There we go. What was I saying there? I can't remember what I was going to say there. But
animal cruelty.
Those were the moments that were cut from the British release. But even with that, it got a 15 over here. In America, it's a PG with the animal cruelty.
They don't have anything between PG and R, do they?
Well, they didn't at the time, but the PG-13 came. Was it Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom a couple of years later? They created the PG-13.
That's the same year, 84.
Was it? Yeah, so it would have been just after this, I think.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because I'm reading about this. That
Indiana Jones was probably the straw that broke the camel's back.
Chicken with you. Back to chicken.
Yeah, mate.
For anyone wondering in our listeners sort of thing, what's going on? Pete is eating leftover chicken for breakfast. Back to your chicken.
Eat your chicken. But yeah, I mean, we didn't have the 12 at the time, of course, did we? But it just goes to show the discrepancy in sort of attitudes that the Americans cut back on the. Well, I was going to say they cut back on the sexual content, but even then, it's still quite. There's still enough for that for you to sit and.
Horny?
That's a bit.
Well, there was interesting. There were, what was it? The Day the Earth Caught Fire film. There was a commentary with the director, and he was reflecting on it. It was really interesting because he was watching it for the first time for ages, and he wasn't sure which country's edit he was watching, and he was really looking forward to the bit where the woman in it gets changed or something, and it's like, I don't know if this is the American or the British version, because the British one, or one of them cut out the swearing and one of them cut out the nudity, and he was like, I wonder which one this is.
But I think a 15's about right. I mean, I was watching this last night thinking, well, yesterday, again, revisiting it, and thinking, well, I don't think I'd let my 10-year-old watch it, really. I don't know. But yeah. It's a strange choice for a family-friendly film, but apparently, according to Schwarzenegger, De Laurentiis was motivated by the success of E.T.
Of course.
Yeah,
that very comparable film.
Exactly, that's what I thought already. But
it's not a single camel punched in E.T. as far as I remember.
No. It would have been better if Conan was going around ancient Samaria trying to find parts to an old phone and phoning home. That would have been a better film.
So in terms of contemporary reviews, did anybody dig up any?
Yes, reviews? I actually did.
That's great. Yeah. What did you get?
We don't normally do this.
So Roger Ebert.
Yeah,
I got some really interesting stuff actually. That I only looked at this morning, and I think before this I was just ready to talk about how silly it was. But he does mention something interesting in this. Actually, we might be able to talk about something sensible about the film. But yeah, he says it's the beginning of a movie dynasty, which again is interesting because it is a sequel. One that could replace Tarzan in supplying our need for a noble savage in the movies. And that's interesting when you start to think about that, because then you can start to think about characters like, I don't know, maybe a stretch, but like Dirty Harry and the Man with No Name in the spaghetti westerns, where they're, so, obviously in those films, we're talking different kinds of savages, but they're not part of the nice society or whatever, but they've also got a noble code or whatever, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. The idea of a noble savage being a new, well, I don't know if it's new, but a forefront sort of character type.
Yeah.
Says about it being sillier, funnier, and more entertaining than the first Conan, and repackaging Conan as your family-friendly barbarian. And that sort of thing always makes me think of the RoboCop stuff, because I don't think any of the films ended up being a massively family friendly, apart from maybe the last one. But by the time the sequel came out, there were computer games and toys and stuff, aimed at children, which was always a bit bizarre.
Sorry, Vic, no, go on. Sorry.
I was just going back to the said it does not require extraordinary acting ability, which I'm sure we'll come on to. More cheerful than the first Conan movie. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I think looking at quite a few of the reviews, there's Vincent Canby's in the New York Times said as well, this is the first in what threatens to be a long line of sequels to Conan the Barbarian. But threatens, of course, so you get the gist of his review from that tone. But there was a bit of an expectation, I think, that there were going to be many Conan films, and in fact, of course, owing to various factors, one of which was that Schwarzenegger wasn't happy with what they did with this film, but also became busy with other projects. That the projected sequels, Conan sequels, because Milius wanted Schwarzenegger back to make King Conan, didn't he? At one point, was it King Conan?
Yeah, there's King Conan or Conan the Conqueror.
Conan the Conqueror, yeah, and which would completely, from what I understand, would have completely ignored what happened in Conan the Destroyer and just sort of, erased it from.
And with good cause.
Yeah.
there was some notes on IMDb, I think, that after the film, Schwarzenegger reprised his role as Conan for something. I can't remember what it was.
It's not. He doesn't play Conan in Red Sonja, does he? He plays a character that's very like Conan.
Yeah, but there was something else, like a computer game or something, where he's in it. I'll have to see if I can find that. Okay.
Well, there was a Conan computer game, wasn't there?
There's been loads.
But most recently, Conan Exiles, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I think that was most recently. The Conan thing. I don't know if any of you have read any Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, I've read some of the Conan stuff.
Yeah, I've got my issues with Robert E. Howard. I mean, he's kind of a basement dweller who sort of had to dreamt up this barbarian that rampaged and seduced women and so on and so forth. There's a lot of sort of weird chauvinistic stuff in Howard's writing. But,
sort of parallel to Lovecraft around the same time, isn't it? Problematic modern views, should we say?
Yeah, but I think his sense of world building is incredible. I really like Howard's writing. I've read a lot of Howard's. I've reread some of his work a couple of years back, actually. The same with Lovecraft as well, isn't it? And this film is a bit of a dovetailing of Howard and Lovecraft with Dagoth, this sort of statue that's brought to life by this jeweled horn in its forehead. And Dagoth sort of sounding a little bit like Dagon as well anyway, but this sense of these ancient gods, these old gods, which bubbled away in the back of the Howard books, Howard stories I should say, but there seems to be the story that this script is based on, as I say, by Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway, seems to be as much influenced by Lovecraft as Howard's work. I mean, there's a few of the Conan stories that were quite horror themed anyway, weren't there?
Mm-hmm.
You might recall Red Mists, I think, was one of them. With vampires and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I really like Milius's Conan the Barbarian. I think it's it captures that spirit and that sort of irony of Howard's work very well. Like I say, there are some sort of quite problematic viewpoints if looking at the Howard stories from a modern perspective. But it's the same with Conan the Barbarian, because of course that's a film that is depending on one's point of view, is either an exploration of the sort of seductive appeal of sort of fascism, really, or a fascist film, isn't it? It's a bit like Dirty Harry, isn't it? You can look at it in more than one, and in fact, both of those function kind of as mirrors for your own soul. I think it's getting a bit deep into it, but you take from Conan the Barbarian what you bring to it. I mean, I find it, for me, it's a film about how seductive that sort of totalitarian mindset can be in the form of Thulsa Doom, and the Conan figure that sort of quells that threat is equally problematic. That line, "What is best in life, Conan?" and to see your enemies kneel before you and to hear the lamentations of the women.
I would argue there's a counter argument to that, though, sort of thing, that comes very early in the film before he has actually evolved and grown as a character, and
I just wanted to quote the line, AD.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We heard the lamentation of the women. It's a very strange. I think it's about probably almost like the first line of dialogue, proper dialogue, in it, apart from the dad's speech, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean,
let's not talk. Don't get us on to Barbarian, because we're done. We won't talk about Destroyer anymore.
yeah. I'll dial back. But yeah, Canby also said that. So, like I say, Canby said, like Ebert, that there was a sense that there were going to be sort of many sequels, and of course, the only other Conan film with Schwarzenegger was Red Sonja, which isn't really a Conan film, Conan influence, until that Jason Momoa remake about 10 years ago.
But the thing I was thinking of was, I've just looked at it, Arnold Schwarzenegger almost returned as Conan in Netflix Love, Death and Robots Season 2.
Right.
Quite interesting. There's also a call on here for Arnold Schwarzenegger fans want King Conan now more than ever. So
yes, yeah.
That's because there's not much time left.
Exactly, yeah. But Canby also says, though the film was entirely made in Mexico on some rugged locations, some of those locations were the same location used in Dune, David Lynch's Dune. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. Handsomely photographed by Jack Cardiff, and I think that's a valid point as well, because Cardiff's photography in this is great. From the opening shot of those the guys riding across the or the Queen leading the sort of heavies riding across the landscape with that red filter. I mean, I think it's beautifully shot. So they're the films entirely made in Mexico. The sensibility is Southern California suburban, complete with patio cookouts. The only difference is that the meat on the spit is likely to be an unfriendly barbarian neighbour. I quite like that. And Paul Willisstein in the Morning Call said, everything about this movie is epic. The scenery, the cinematography, the special effects, the actors and actresses, the musical score, even the credits. I don't know if he's being sarcastic here.
Is he watching the same film?
I'm not sure. And the movie is surprisingly better than one would imagine for its kind. Production values are high, and director Richard Fleischer, with a long list of epics to his credit, keeps the action moving, which is what the genre is all about. Aimed chiefly at teens and pre-teens, it is essentially a Saturday afternoon movie, the kind of film you might watch if it's raining. It's nothing less and certainly nothing more than that. And I'm not quite sure how far his tongue's wedged in his cheek there. I do take issue that the Blu-ray that I've got's got a quote on it, even more enjoyable than Conan the Barbarian, which I think it needs something on the end of it if you're hammered. If
you haven't seen The Barbarian, if you're a big Grace Jones fan, if you like sweaty monsters, I don't know. There's something needs, if you wanted to see Schwarzenegger in less clothes, there's something that needs to be put on the end of that quote, because it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't track. It's one of those quotes that's taken out of context. This is more enjoyable than Conan the Barbarian if you're an idiot.
Yeah. But I mean,
certainly that comment on keeping the action flowing. I mean, that's a comment for later that I've got. You know,
it does. To be fair, I mean, the action, it does move along at a fair clip, doesn't it? There's lots of fights.
I don't know, but I think the whole film could probably be cut down by about 40 minutes if they cut out all the pondering.
An hour and 40.
Well, every scene, every sort of scene or shot goes on for like 1 or 2 seconds too long. Where someone watches someone leave or someone nods at something thoughtfully that someone's just said.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Peter. Now, I was when I was doing my research for this, I read that and I didn't put it in my notes, but I can't remember if it's in Schwarzenegger's autobiography or it's something else. Another piece that I read about it, but somebody else said exactly the same thing. That there's too many scenes that just drag. There's like 3 or 4 seconds at the end of a shot.
Yeah, I think the thing is, my argument would be with this is that they're trying to ape. Okay, let's go back to the Barbarian again. I mean, Barbarian is written by Oliver Stone, directed by John Milius. There is a pedigree in Barbarian that's not. I know Richard Fleischer is we've done a lot, but there's not. It doesn't have that same kind of pedigree. There's more thought. There's more consideration in Barbarian, which is one of the things I really like about it. And it can be ponderous, but they're trying to do that in this. But there's nothing there to ponder
about. Yeah,
well, there's no weight to any of it.
I mean, the thing is, I think just to sort of interrupt you about Fleischer. I mean, Fleischer made The Vikings, which is that's an amazing film, and
but that's 1958.
But yeah, this is what I'm saying. I don't think the issue is Fleischer. I think the fact that Fleischer was at a stage in his career where he was just willing to sort of do what suits him. Yeah.
But you can't, you if you given crap ingredients of the script and you try to make them deep, you just look stupid. You end up with something like The Room.
Yeah, and I think the issue with this isn't Fleischer's handling. I think Fleischer handles it well. For me, I think the issue is not the story as well by Thomas and Conway, who are comic book writers. They know the craft. They know Conan. I think the issue is with the script by Stanley Mann, and that seems to be
It's awful.
There are lots of scenes that kind of finish like in I think Monty Python Life of Brian. I can't remember if it's Spike Milligan or if it was Palin, where a scene ends and he just sort of goes, and sort of flaps his hands about a bit and then walks off.
It's like the difference between, between Barbarian and this, again, is like the drunk scenes. When Conan gets drunk in Barbarian, there's a couple of things. There's one way he smacks the camel, but he does it out of reflex. Yeah. The camel sort of he just sort of walks into it and he's like, because he's drunk and he don't know what he's doing. But there's a sense of menace in that scene where all the people then come around going, you're too big to be a thief, get out. And they're like, And then the bit later on where they get all the riches, they steal the jewels, and then they think everything's perfect, and then it just ends with him face down in a bowl of, green gruel. Because that's, they get so hammered and wasted and everything like that. In this, he turns into a babbling idiot. The promise I was kingdomed. Who wrote this? Yeah. And that's the difference between these two films and how they approach the character, and that's one of the problems.
I mean, if that comic book that I mentioned earlier that Thomas and Conway wrote in 1990 called Conan the Horn of Azoth, Roy Thomas wrote an introduction to that book in which he said that the Dino De Laurentiis, the producer, had no idea who Conan was. It was quite a scathing sort of account of the making of the film. He said that De Laurentiis had no idea who Conan was and wouldn't listen to the writers when they tried to explain the paradigms of Robert E. Howard's work to him.
Because he had producer on the first one, Pressman.
I think it was Edward Pressman. Yeah, Pressman. Yeah. But I mean, even Schwarzenegger in his autobiography, or one of his autobiographies, like I said, and I'm quoting here, but you couldn't make Conan the Barbarian into Conan the Babysitter. That's a great line. He was not a PG character. He was a violent guy who lived for conquest and revenge. But despite that, the tone was made much more comic book because there were De Laurentiis wanted to sort of tap into the popularity of E.T. And Schwarzenegger has in that autobiography, I think, as I recall, he has some similar doubts or expresses some similar doubts about Terminator 2 because that was a similar situation. We've got quite an adult. I use that in the broad sense. An adult. First film, The Terminator or Conan the Barbarian, and then the sequel sort of tries to mould itself into a picture that's more family friendly. Obviously Conan the Destroyer in this instance, but you have the same. Is that your chicken, Pete?
No, I'm opening raspberry mini rolls now.
Jesus Christ!
You just eat all the time. What was I saying? Terminator 2 was an attempt to sort of make that, with a sympathetic Terminator played by Schwarzenegger, and the sort of the youthful central character, Edward Furlong's character. I don't want to get too much into T2, but I mean at the time I found it. It was, I have the same issues with that as I have with this. That the action's good, but I find it a bit of a betrayal of the first film. I think. I know that's probably a bit controversial. I know a lot of people liked it.
No, I can see exactly what you mean. I mean, the first one is like hardcore dark sci-fi, isn't it? The second one, and the problem is that I guess the difference there is that T2 at the time was it the most expensive film ever made?
It was, yeah.
So you couldn't make something like the Terminator to recoup that cost. Conan the Destroyer looks like it was made on a fiver.
I think it had a reasonable budget, though. To be fair, and I think it
did, and it does show.
It made more than Conan the Barbarian, didn't it? Which is probably at the box office, which might be a sad reflection of mainstream cinema taste. But anyway, but certainly this film fits into that. I think fits more into this paradigm than Conan the Barbarian, but that paradigm of 80s sword and sorcery films like Beastmaster, Deathstalker, the numerous Italian rip-offs of that, Conquest, Ruggiero by Lucio Fulci, Ruggiero Deodato's The Barbarians, which I rewatched a couple of weeks back as a birthday treat. Joe D'Amato's Ator the Fighting Eagle, She with Sandal Bergman, who of course was played Valeria in Conan the Barbarian, The Sorcerer, Hawk the Slayer, Albert Pune's The Sword and the Sorcerer. I think Conan the Destroyer, with its silliness, Crawl, yeah. I think with its silliness, it kind of fits in. Conan the Barbarian's a bit of an outlier because it's a bit more thoughtful, I think.
Well, is Conan? I mean, is it that sort of genre cycle where you get the first one? I mean, Conan the Barbarian kind of kickstarted it off, I believe. There's probably, I know there were Sword and Sandals epics before then, but I think that period, early 80s, there was a slew, especially Italian style ones.
Yeah,
that came through on the back of it. So
Hawk the Slayer was the first of that, wasn't it? I think the sword sorcery.
I guess, yeah. But I think Conan the Barbarian kind of set the template, didn't it?
Yeah.
It sort of set this is what it is. So there are buddy movies before Lethal Weapon, but Lethal Weapon set the template. That's how you look at it. So, and is Conan the Destroyer therefore the sort of like Scream, or is it like Scary Movie to Scream? That is it, but not unintentionally. Is this the later we need to do almost is it kind to say, well, let's deconstruct Conan the Barbarian and look at Destroyer in the sense that it's actually parodying it? I'm not going to do that because Destroyer's crap and it doesn't deserve that. But is it possible that kind of loop where you get the imitators and then you get the ones that actually look at it in a different way? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, certainly it's a different approach to it. I mean, it's like a taming of the material, isn't it?
Yeah. And just to say as well, Barbarian made more money, a lot more.
Did it? Oh, well,
according to IMDb, worldwide gross for Barbarian was 68 million. Destroyer was 31.
Oh, right. So, it's quite substantial.
Even in the US, Barbarian took 39.
Yeah. What I find interesting about Conan the Destroyer, though, I think one of the things that I do find interesting about it is that you've got special effects makeup by Giannetto de Rossi. Presumably this is a De Laurentiis sort of connection, but Giannetto de Rossi, who did some of the makeup effects for Lucio Fulci's zombie film, and the creature design is by Carlo Rambaldi, who had worked, of course, with in Italian horror cinema on Lucio Fulci's thriller Lizard in a Woman's Skin. There's a famous case of that film where Rambaldi designed these sort of vivisected dogs that were still alive in a nightmare sequence, which was alleged to be so realistic that the producers were taken to court in four cities in Italy. I think it was 4 cities, with allegations that they had actually mutilated these poor dogs. And Rambaldi wheeled out these animatronic creatures that he'd sort of created. And Rambaldi's a bit of a genius. I mean, Rambaldi designed E.T. as well, didn't he? Of course.
Yeah. Exactly.
That was part of his Hollywood career. The creature designs are all right in this. I mean, I don't think they're quite top tier though. The more Star Crash than E.T. Especially Dagoth at the end. When it starts to come alive, I was referred to Dagoth as a youth as that jelly baby monster from that Conan film, because there's a point when Dagoth's statue starts to come alive where it looks more like a jelly baby.
Well, there's a bit in the middle between when it's Dagoth, it's stupid, and with the sleeping god, I quite like the sleeping god statue. I quite like that. When it's the horn in it, there's a bit where it kind of starts to get all veiny and weird.
Yeah,
If it had stopped there, I'd actually been into that and gone maybe like, I don't know, sort of stop motion Harryhausen or something. They could have had quite a good sequence there with that, because that looks it almost looks quite Harryhausen-ish, that bit. But then they go full on rubber, and it's not good.
I think the bit you're talking about, AD, is the bit when I rewatched it yesterday, and I sort of watched it and thought, oh, this is a bit, this is almost like Rob Bottin's work on The Thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That monster at the end. And as you say, if it had gone stop motion. But yeah, then it's Andre the Giant in a sort of slimy suit, isn't it? And
with a weird wrong way mouth. It's like,
anyway,
who thought of this?
Yeah, but yeah, it's not Rambaldi's best work, I don't think. But I find it interesting that, because I'm a fan of Italian sort of horror cinema, that De Rossi and Rambaldi worked on this film, and it's sort of it draws me back. I mean, some of the makeup effects are quite good, like you've of course got those moments where Conan slashes people off, and there's these sort of geysers of blood spurt, which is is an imitation of what we see in the first film, isn't it? But you've also got there's quite a good beheading, isn't there, when he rescues the Wizard of the Mound, Kiro is his name, from the cannibals, and the cannibals seem to have walked in from Giannetto's Cannibal Holocaust, don't they? They look like
a different film.
Yeah,
like,
they look like the
guys.
Yeah, this is a kids' film, and Jenna says, "What are they going to do with him?" And
why is he wandered off from his beach hut?
Into
the middle of nowhere.
But Conan says they're having lunch, doesn't he? That's and then he rescues him, but he sort of rides in. But yeah, they look like the swamp people from Cannibal Holocaust.
It's so stupid.
It's so bizarre, that thing. But Conan swings his sword, doesn't he? And he lops this, and this head goes flying into the air. This is a PG rated film in America,
Yeah, true.
What got me about that scene is they're essentially about to cook that gentleman on a spit, aren't they?
Yeah.
You said that so polite back.
Yeah, and Peter Labbit for leftovers, yes, tomorrow.
Why have they kept his clothes on?
Crackling. they're leather clothes, so it'd be a bit of crackling.
Yeah.
Cleaned a bit of wizard out your teeth with that.
Having never cooked a person, that never even entered my head. I just thought, it's cooking that fellow with his clothes on. But yeah, it is a little bit of a that sort of Italian sort of cannibal film cycle, isn't it? In the middle of a romp.
Yeah, well, one could almost say this is the talking of their clothes on. You're looking at the same thing in Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks. I mean, let's not forget the Ewoks are about to eat ham.
Yeah.
Let's not forget this. The Ewoks, cute and cuddly. They were going to eat Han, clothes and all. But he had a leather waistcoat on. Crackling.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
the secrets of cannibalism, cannibalistic cooking.
We mentioned Akiro. I mean, Akiro narrates, the actor narrates the opening and closing of this, doesn't he? The same as in Conan the Barbarian. Mm-hmm. Excuse me,
worse. Much worse though. But his intonation and his delivery is way worse.
Is the connotation? The opening narration ends with the same phrase. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. But what I was going to say was that that introduction feels rushed and there's much less inflection than the first one. And I think that opening sort of sets the tone for the rest of the film. It feels much more rushed and with less inflection, less nuance.
That's true because if we can talk about the music a bit, because absolutely adore. I absolutely adore the soundtrack. It's my favourite soundtrack to the first film. It's an amazing suite of music that he created for the first film. And this, as soon as it starts, you're like, it's this. Do you know what this film feels like? It feels like supermarket own brand Conan.
Yes.
Everything's it's not got the label on it, but it's just the same. Trust me, it's just the same. It's like it's not really. It's not. No, trust me. When you get it open, you won't notice a difference, and everything feels a little bit off. It's like it's okay. I can kind of see it. It's kind of an imitation of the thing. It's like the thing. It isn't Conan. It's imitation.
It's like it's a panda
pop
for a takeaway.
Yeah, it's that.
Got a picture at home.
It's that dodgy cover you'd get of a band when you used to go in supermarkets like Tate's and stuff in the 80s, and you'd hear them on the thing, and it's like this isn't quite Tears for Fears, but it's similar, and this is what this feels like. This film feels like someone saw Conan and went, we can do that, we can do it for but we'll change it, and didn't get it, and that's what that comes down to the opening sequence, as you say, Paul, because they're riding across the steps or the whatever it is, they're riding across that big open landscape, and then but they think, we've got to get the Conan music in, quick, get the Conan music in, Basil, get the Conan music in, Basil. No, let me Basil music, and that's what it feels like. It feels like Conan by committee. We need that music, and people recognise that music, but the music's slightly speeded up and weird.
I was going to say it's recognisable as Polydorus. It's got those the same motifs and themes, but it just doesn't feel right, does it?
No.
And at the start of the film, of course, the riders and the Queen encounter Conan in the battle at the site of the Battle of the Mounds, and it's a callback to the first film, isn't it? He's mourning at that slab where Valeria's body was laying.
Yeah.
He can, and the fight. Sorry, Adi, and the fight between Conan and the Queen's guards.
The pointless fight.
Yeah, it's utterly pointless, but it's a callback to the Battle of the Mounds in the same setting, isn't it? And it's just like you say, it's an imitation of the first film in a way that doesn't feel satisfying. So you was going to say something else, Adi? Sorry.
No, I think Mark.
Was it Mark? Sorry.
I think it was me.
Someone was.
Yeah, it was just I was writing some notes as I was watching that first scene, and I think it pretty much sums up the whole film. So you've got the opening fight, and I've just scribbled down my notes of slow motion man holding his net, then slow motion of the same man being thrown across the screen, going
incredible slow motion.
And then
Garth Marenghi level to slow motion.
Then no blood, then all the blood. Arnie just punched a horse, and then Conan's thinking face. He does that. Where she goes. The Queen says to him, "Think," and he's like, thinking. And that's it.
Yeah, because
it's my favourite kind of fight scene in films. Where they all attack one at a time.
Yeah, there's a good gaff noted as well.
The first bloke comes with his nets and he tries to catch Conan and it doesn't work, and the next bloke goes, well, I'll do the exact same thing and that'll definitely work.
There's a good gaff noted on IMDb about
didn't do it right, but I'll do it right.
There's a gaff noted on IMDb about the net. When he slices through it, it's got a metallic sound effect.
Yeah, I noticed that. Well, I assumed, to be honest, it was a reinforced net. I thought.
He's a muscly gentleman.
There was a bit that I noticed where he hits the ground with his sword to a similar sort of thing, but I thought it would be, childish to mention such things.
There's too many bits, and there's some great notes on IMDb where whether what they say is not what they say. The overdubs just don't match their lips in any way, shape, or way. You're like, oh, God Lord.
I think there was a point when I was watching it, and because I was having problems with it freezing, that for a good chunk of me watching the film, the people on screen were speaking a good second or two before there was any noise. So it reminded me of sort of like an old, the old dubbed martial arts films.
Yeah. Well, this is genuine, and I'll just be dead quick. But I bought a DVD collection of what's his face, David Lynch short films.
Yeah.
And me and a friend were watching it. Now, we may or may not have. But we're in the correct mood to be watching it. is all I'm saying.
Eating chicken.
Yeah, and.
Old chicken.
And there was very old. It made you feel all tingly. And there was a short film where there were two cowboys talking by a field or something.
Right.
And we were watching it, and the dub was off. It was like a few seconds of either before or after. It wasn't matching up. And we watched the whole thing thinking, oh, it's David Lynch. That's the point. They've done that on purpose. But then we paused it halfway through or something and to, I don't know, get some more cake and restarted it. And the dub sorted itself out, and it was just the DVD was playing back a bit funny. But we just accepted it. We just accepted it. Oh, David Lynch. Yeah, he's done that for a reason.
It was happening on mine last night. You know, when they come into that village and they find Grace Jones and she's locked up. And they're all sort of talking to her.
Well, yeah,
that's when it started doing it.
She's tethered to a rock,
pillar,
isn't she? Or a pillar, yeah. And
there's that hideous scream she does, isn't there? But that's when it started going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, her
mouth would open and she'd bare her teeth, and then about 10 minutes later, I'd get that shriek.
Yeah, I mean, I like Grace Jones's character, this Zula. I think it's. I mean, we talk about sort of representation in modern Hollywood, but you think back to the 80s and you think back to characters like Zula, and I think characters like Grace Jones. I mean, Vamp. She was very good in Vamp. View to a Kill is a terrible film, but I wouldn't blame Christopher Walken for being that, let alone Grace Jones. But I think this character Zula, very resourceful female character. I think it's a far stronger representation, I think, than a lot of what we see in sort of Hollywood. Where
but then she has to be scared of the rat.
Well, that's a joke, isn't it? Yeah, and they just give this knowing look, don't they? When she sort of I'm scared of rats, so what?
Yeah.
But you say that
about the diversity. There was a shot I remember when they all come in to see the castle in the lake. Superman's Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah.
And they're all looking at it, and it is for the main sort of group of people on the adventure. It is everyone's quite well represented, isn't there?
They are, yeah.
You've got obviously the Grace Jones, the black lady, and then you've got the sort of Asian wizard guy, and then you've got then you've got the pony that they've put peanut butter on its gums and they're making it talk in Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Sorry, Pete, you were saying something.
Well, is that a good thing? Because I did think, and someone else would talk about it, but you've got the Japanese.
I was just saying, Pete, that we sort of look back. There's a tendency to look back on 80s cinema. And particularly as being sort of having a dearth of positive representations of women or people of different ethnic backgrounds, but I don't think that's necessarily always true.
No, I mean the Barbarian's got Valeria.
Yeah.
Sandal Bergman.
Yeah.
I mean she's brilliant in that. I mean, she's absolutely 100% the strongest character in that film.
Exactly. Yeah. She's the heart of it, I think, isn't she, Valeria? Yeah. And I think there's a very sort of patronising tendency in sort of current criticism to look back and say, aren't we enlightened now? But weren't we uncivilized before? And I think it's like I often say about a lot of the modern superhero films, which are sort of often elevated for their sort of diverse representations. They feel very fashion. They're almost like Leni Riefenstahl, to me when I look at them. Very much of a totalitarian mindset,
I look at this film through the eye of someone who's much younger and who wasn't even born when this film was out, and obviously, like you say, nowadays everyone's going, oh, look how diverse our films and our comics and our books are, but then you get this, and it's like no one's calling attention to it. So
yeah, it's not an issue in the
times
narrative.
when people are going, look how diverse our films are, by calling attention to it, you're taking away what it's supposed to mean, if you know what I mean.
You're actually drawing attention to the thing that should be invisible.
Should be thought about.
Yeah, but yeah, that Zula character, I think Grace Jones is great in this, and she handles the fight scenes really well. I think. I mean, it's Grace Jones that throws that. She teaches Jenna to fight, doesn't she, with the staff?
And, well, she offers to, doesn't she?
And there's a drunken Conan says, "Oh, use a proper weapon, not a toothpick like that." And he tries to show her how to wield a sword, and shows her one move, and that's it. So now you know how to defend yourself. But it's Grace Jones at the end that she throws that staff, that pointed stick, doesn't she, and pierces the
wizard.
Yeah, the speaker, the keeper of the horn, the speaker, or the sort of the head wizard, if you like. So she's got a great part in this, I think. Grace
Head
Jones.
wizard. Ooh.
But I want to come on to the magic versus might thing a bit later. Going back to the fights thing, I think it's interesting that the fights here were choreographed by Vic Armstrong.
I can't help noticing, but Peter's muted again, which means he's eating.
He's eating, yeah.
Mini cheddars.
Good lord! But the fights here by
child
by Vic Armstrong, who did quite a few of the fights for some of the later Bond films, didn't he? And also, I think he did the Indiana Jones films. And Pat Roach is in this as well, as you said, AD. He plays the wizard in the Crystal Castle and Thoth Amon. Yeah. That great. And I'll come back to Thoth Amon in a few moments. But that monster in that room, that hall of mirrors.
The reveal of that when he lifts the hood up is just amazing. It's just
I know you expected something quite terrifying, and it's just.
I had a description of him. Where's it gone? The black pickle lizard monster.
Yeah. I mean, you expected something, and now what did disturb me was, can you remember Beastmaster? And do you remember the berserkers that were sort of humanoid, but they were half some sort of creature, and they always disturbed me as a young person.
It's like a rubbish bit of Don't Look Now when he lifts the red hood up.
Yeah, it's just a bit disappointing here, but the fight's good, the fight choreography is good.
It reminded me very much of Power Rangers when the monster gets big and they're in the Megazord a little bit.
There's a lot of arm stretching and a lot of a lot of that.
There's a bit of a fight.
Schwarzenegger noises.
There's a bit of a fight later on, isn't there, where he's fighting one of the bad guys with a helmet on or something, and they do a sort of YMCA sort of routine to each other where they both show their moves. I
noticed that, Peter.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
Oh yeah, where they're doing the thing with the swords.
Yeah, well that's what they took that from, and he does that a little bit in Barbarian, but that's when he's kind of getting his skills back in it. There's that one scene on the beach after he's nearly died. And it fits in context. He's like, right, can I still do this? All right, fair enough. You don't do it in the middle of a fight because it stinks of Beastmaster, and Beastmaster's terrible.
What they're doing there is changing styles, isn't it? Well, I'm going to use this style. It's like rock, paper, scissors. And finally,
you're giving it far too much credence, Paul.
Conan puts his big sword, big chopper in front of himself, and the guy charges. That sword, I think, I read somewhere that sword cost $10,000.
Yeah, all the swords did.
Yeah. But that fight with Thoth Amon in the Crystal Castle, there's a theme in this of magic.
Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, in the Fortress of Solitude. There's a theme in this of magic versus might or muscles, I think, and that's a recurring issue. In a recurring theme.
Just before we move on to that, can I just say the one last thing about the fight? After the fight and they escape, and they're in the boat rowing away, And then Akira turns around and goes, oh, it was all an illusion. Like, no, one, it's actually falling into the lake. It's quite real.
Yeah.
An illusion would just disappear. And that's one of the things that, the things that annoy me about this film is that lack of attention to detail. They could have just quite easily just had it fade away. Just fades away. It's just a model. It just fades away. There you go. That's an illusion, not something that you see bubbling down into the sea with collapsing. And if it was an illusion, all those rocks we ran away from, that'd be all right. Wouldn't matter, would it? It's an illusion. Yeah. No, it's not an illusion, you idiot.
Well, I suppose going back to what you were saying, Paul, I was going to make an offhand sort of comment on the fight where Conan destroys the pickle monster through clumsiness, because he just sort of sweeps back and sort of hits the mirror and then realizes the weakness. But I suppose if you want to go back to that review before by whoever it was by, where he says about the noble barbarian, then perhaps that is part of it. That he's mindless in a way, but his strength is physical strength, but he wins.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, because it sets up at the start that Queen Taramis establishes herself, or she presents herself as some sort of necromancer, doesn't she? Because she says, she will revive or enable Valeria to be reborn if Conan accepts the quest to transport Jenna to get the key and then to get the jeweled horn. And she says to Conan, "We shall both have what we want through magic." And then, of course, in that crystal castle, you threw me off there, Adi. The crystal palace.
That's us three listening to you.
the crystal palace.
That's what I'm dressed as right now. You can't see.
That's a good approximation of Pete eating his chicken, I think. That's the cannibals. The crystal palace has that moment where Conan realizes that he can defeat magic with his muscles, essentially, and I mean that the staging of that fight quite deliberately echoes the climax of Enter the Dragon, doesn't it, with the Hall of Mirrors? And there's also the man with the golden gun, isn't it, with James Bond facing off against Scaramanga. That's the Hall of Mirrors, isn't it? So, and generally speaking, at the end of Enter the Dragon, I think, doesn't Bruce Lee break the mirrors to realise which one is actually the bad guy, Han?
Yeah.
So, and that's what we see here, that Conan breaks these mirrors and realises that in doing so he's damaging the form that the wizard's taken, leading to the wizard being sort of revealed.
What's as well? Maybe I missed this because I've seen it a lot of times, but maybe I didn't understand. Why is there a sort of bit of mystery at the end? Why don't you just go smash the mirrors? Why is he stand in the middle and throw his sword through one?
Yes.
Well, because there's two, and behind one of them.
Well, if he smashes one and he's not behind then, he just goes and gets him in the other one.
Why does he feel the need to make some sort of unnecessary 50-50 mirror Russian roulette sort of game where he's took his sword away?
Because there might be a tiger behind one.
The way that he defeats the wizard, if you recalls the way that, and it might be something set up in the original story perhaps, but the way that he defeats it, because he throws the sword and pierces the wizard, it goes through the glass and it pierces the wizard to the chest, and that's the way that Zula defeats the other wizard at the end of the film, isn't it? And
big pointy thing through the chest does tend to sort of destroy most things.
But you would think you would just break the mirrors and then sort of realise.
I didn't know whether there was something I'd missed, whether there was actually a reason that if he broke the wrong one, then the wizard would be able to, I don't know, respawn the mirrors in some you got to do it again, like in a really bad video game.
It feels like one of those things that's not explained properly, I think, doesn't it?
When he walks out of that mirror with the sword in him, he's just, I think he's one of my favourite scenes, because he just walks out and he's got this sword, and the look on his face, he's just like, you knob.
You've got away with it if you want to be pesky kids. You pesky baboons.
It's like he can't wait to get back to our feet.
We had a fight, but there was no need for this, wasn't there, mate?
But I mean, going back to that magic versus might thing. I mean, Conan. I mean, we know in the first film, we know from the Howard books that Conan's got his own sort of form of spirit, his own form of faith, hasn't he? But he realised the belief in steel in Conan the Barbarian. But here, I mean, he scoffs, doesn't he, when Akira reads from in the tomb the destiny of Jenna, which is written in hieroglyphics, and Conan just says it's just writing on the wall. doesn't he? Sort of dismisses that. And then at the end of the film, of course, how he defeats Dagoth is again by brute force. He climbs on the creature's back. Is it Akiro shouts, "You've got to tear the horn from it, tear out the horn." Life. And he climbs on Akiro's back and he rips off this creature. I mean, he rips off the creature's horn in order to defeat this sort of ancient god, this sort of Lovecraftian god. He tears off the horn, and it's as phallic as it. You can't describe it in a way that doesn't sort of accommodate that. But it's just sinew.
But you've got physical strength versus magic, but the alternative was when it was magic versus magic, when you had the two wizards fighting with the mouth thing, and it was some sort of wizard standoff with like grunting. It was like a grunting indigestion battle until one of the bad wizard gets really bad acid reflux and smoke comes out of his nose, and that means he's lost.
Yeah, Akiro says something like, "I know how to defeat a wizard," and then he uses magic himself, doesn't he? So it's not. I don't think it's a theme that's explored with any consistency, but I think it's an interesting one, nonetheless.
Yeah. So essentially, what you're saying is this is a film that does, supports, brawn over brains.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, not brains.
Essentially.
Well, magic is. Let's face it. Magic is. Magic is the representation of, wizards are seen as study and all.
Well, but to get slightly serious, we're going back to that noble barbarian. That the goodness or the brains or intellect or whatever you want to call it, the wizards are shown as very ornate or whatever. They're the people saying how clever they are. They're the people in society saying, "We are the wise ones, you listen to us, we should be in control." Whereas Conan is just inherently good and is inherently the one who will win. Yeah.
The other thing that Conan refuses to participate in is any kind of hierarchy, isn't it? Because the wizard, the wizard that's associated with the keeper of the horn or the keepers of the horn, and that they are embedded within the hierarchy. But as Conan says to Sarah Douglas at the start of the film, she says, "I'm Queen Taramis." She says, "You're not my queen."
But he wants to be his own king, though, doesn't he? So
he wants to
participate in hierarchy. He just wants to be in charge
at the top. Yeah,
but he's quite happy to get everybody else into servitude at the end, though.
Indeed, yeah.
When what's her face, when she becomes Queen Jenna, she's like, "I need a fool and I need a thingy and I need."
Yeah, I mean
go on, you do that. I'm off. I'm bored of you.
That whole throne room set piece, it played with the best Michael Brook primary school tradition. It was just like a children's nativity play of, "I have the frankincense," and then someone nods and goes, "Yes, I have the myrrh." Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the original version that Malak was Tracy Walter was supposed to be given by Jenna the role. You were a thief, so you would be the best keeper of the treasure. But in this final version, he becomes the fool. I'm not sure if that line's redubbed or if it was a reshoot. But yeah, he's sort of quite willing to accept that role as the fool, isn't he?
Yeah.
I think coming back to Jenna. Now, one of the things that me watching this yesterday, I found a little bit icky. I think we talked.
We have to talk about this. I think.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about positive representation. I think Grace Jones, great character, so and so. But this weird focus that the film has on sex, and Sarah Douglas says that, or Queen Taramis says that Jenna's virginity must be protected in order to fulfil her destiny, which kind of.
And just to sort of, as an aside on that, then puts her in, what's his face name in charge of her, a man who claims to have slept with 20,000 women.
Yeah, and I mean, when she says that, I kept thinking of the Virgin Connie Swale from Dragnet.
Yeah,
but
it must be intact. It must be.
Yeah. But at a certain point, she becomes besotted with Conan, and she asks Zula what to do.
The handsome Conan.
Yeah, the handsome Conan. Zula says that Zula says that a woman should take a man. That she is attracted to. I can't remember the line that she says exactly, but it's you should take him, and then she doesn't quite know what that means, and she goes to Malak, and she says, "Well, what does that mean?" And Malak sort of stumbles around, trying to explain sort of ways of sex really to this girl.
I mean, they're going on a quest for a horn or something.
I know
he should have. There's plenty of analogy there for him to work with.
Yeah, but at the end he asks her if she knows how flowers. Surely you know how flowers grow. But I think this is all a bit weird, given that Olivia Darbo was 13 at the time, and the character's presumably of a similar age.
And she's 14, I think. Not that it makes any better.
No, it doesn't make it any better.
But I read as well that she was in Bolero at the same time, which was fully naked, full nude. It's just weird.
Yeah, well, there's a weird. It's a bit. I don't know. I read there was an article I read about this that said it was sort of like a committee of sort of male film producers sort of trying to thinking of entertaining ways of sort of explaining sex to teenage girls, and it's sort of it feels a bit like that. I mean, it feels even more awkward in a film that's supposed to be family friendly, I think. And
it is, and the let's face it, the clothes they put her in. They're a bit sheer, and this is quite uncomfortable. You're watching a 14-year-old girl basically be taken advantage of on a film set, and obviously it's done Bolero as well. And it did feel, I was like, this isn't right. You can't. It's not like you. There's no reason why she's 14. She could be, you could cast an 18-year-old, 19, 20-year-old.
Exactly.
So it feels in this what we know now about. The 1980s, and we're talking about positive representation, but the stuff that was going on, this was, it's particularly, it doesn't sit right. Let's just leave it at that. I don't know.
There's the other sequence as well with Malak applying the ointment on Zula's thigh,
grim.
And that's really sleazy. And he's sort of rubbing this thigh, and he gets higher, and Zula says, "My wound is lower," and Malak says, "We don't." It's really sleazy line. "We don't want an infection to spread." And Zula says, "I'll spread your head open." And Malak sort of storms off in a huff. This is what the world has come to. You're trying to help someone and don't even get thanks. And that's played for laughs. And I find that quite distasteful and uncomfortable to watch, I think. But this sort of line of it has its culmination in that weirdly phallic horn, I think. That Dagoth has that. And it's strangely Freudian, this film, I think, isn't it? And I know, sometimes people say that, you think, oh, crikey, yeah. But I think this film is sort of strangely like the original script. One wonders if the original idea, the original story outline. One wonders if this was a bit more of a theme in the foreground of the text. That maybe was buried by I forgot his name that adapted it for the script, that maybe didn't quite sort of get what
Stanley Mann.
Stanley Mann didn't quite get what the original writers were sort of driving at, perhaps. And the Keepers of the Horn, wishing to resurrect date, which is a weird Lovecraftian turn as well. That's something else that's a bit underplayed. It feels like you're hinting at something, but not quite. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Peter, I think, wasn't it, about Zula being scared of the rat? Is it a rat or a mouse? And that's quite a funny moment. But I mean, one of the things that I think the bits of humour that does work here is Malak's cowardice when he's left on his own, and he's, oh well, surely we need somebody to stay with the horses. And, I better come with him. And I think that does work quite well. And also his line, "What's in it for us? Are we a charitable institution?"
Oh, yeah.
That's a good line. That is a good line.
Yeah, a bit strange, but just as an aside, a pleasant aside, the Olivia, she was the love interest in the film I mentioned 1 week, the Beyond the Stars, with one of the Sheens. She was, and there was nothing controversial happened in that one.
Is it interesting to? I mean, you're going on about the writer Stanley Mann, and just looking at he last thing he wrote was in 1988, and he goes back to the 1950s. So similar to Fleischer. So it seems odd. It's almost like old school director and writer are making an old school film in the 1980s, and not quite understanding the sort of time that they're making a film for.
Yeah.
Which I think Conan the Destroyer feels like. It feels like you were saying about the Vikings and things like that. That obviously with Fleischer's earlier work, there's echoes of that, and with the writer being someone who's come through, and they didn't write much more. It's like I said, stopped in 1988. Whereas Barbarian, Milius, Oliver Stone, these people were forward thinking who would go on to do much more. And this feels, the film feels like it's an echo of things they did before, rather than something that was moving things forward in filmic way. It feels very stilted, this film. And it feels very like, oh, this is what this is what kind of fantasy is, rather than this is what a film can actually be about or do. Barbarian is, as you were saying, it's about totalitarian, it's about fascism, it's about the seduction of cults and everything that was very relevant, especially in the sort of late 70s. And whether all that, this is just, it's not really, the problem with this film is it's not really about anything.
No.
And that's one of its issues. It's not,
other than the horn.
Other than getting the horn. It's not about anything, and that's the main problem with Conan the Destroyer. It's an empty, vacuous whole of a film that they've tried to fill with these action scenes and parodies and this notion of, oh, this is what Conan is, without no, you just turned it into a bog standard fantasy quest film. That's what you've done. Yeah. Well done.
Well, I was going to say that the film is more wooden than New Hampshire, which is the second most densely wooded American state behind Maine, which doesn't scan as well for the purposes of this off the cuff quip.
I mean, I will admit to having a soft spot for sort of cheap 80s sorcery films, and there's a lot to like here, I think, and I think the photography is great. I think there's some great matte work in it as well. That when they leave the village and there's that, or they leave the Queen's Palace, in it, there's that avenue of huge statues. There's some great matte work.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's quite nice.
And I like
I think shot.
I think Grace Jones is good. I like Zula. I like Sarah Douglas. I mean, she's queen of 80s villains. I love Sarah Douglas in most things anyway. But it's a series of scenes that don't quite pull together. And I do feel very much that the original script or the original idea, story outline or whatever it was. I don't know if Thomas and Conway got to writing full script for it, but I do. There are hints in this, like I say, the sort of the Freudian stuff, the magic versus might. There are hints of interesting themes there that I just don't think are carried over into the final shooting script, and I don't think I think Fleischer handles the material well. I think the script's the problem, and I think the editing's the problem, as you said, Peter. There's too many scenes that just sort of drag.
Yeah, I agree with all that. The bit I don't agree with, I'm not sure Fleischer does, because I think that there's far too many thrusting into the camera.
Oh yeah,
there's way too much of that, which is a harking back to 50s style.
I'll tell you,
combat film, 50s and 60s. You just don't get that in the. It's just that will just be a pull back and thrust, and someone will go. Ah! It breaks the flow of all the combat.
There's a moment in this, and when I first saw this, it was panned and scanned on TV, and of course it's a scope film, and so this didn't play out until I saw it widescreen, which I think the first time I saw that was on DVD, so probably about 10, 15 years ago. No, maybe more, 20 years ago, something like that. And but when Conan rescues Zula, he cuts the chain or whatever that's tying her to the that pillar, and she's got the staff and she swings it, doesn't she? And it reminded me, it fills the swinging of the staff at the crowd that surround this mob that's gathered around her, fills the widescreen frame, and it reminded me very much. There's a moment in Fritz Lang film Moonfleet about pirates, and Fritz Lang famously said, as you might recall this quote, Fritz Lang famously once said that
widescreen is only good for, or CinemaScope is only good for snakes and funerals. You know, this notion that widescreen was a gimmick in the 50s, wasn't it? You know, much like sort of stereoscopic 3D and so on and so forth, that wouldn't take off. It was a way of differentiating films from television. But the argument was that you could make a decent film in the old Academy ratio. But Fritz Lang shot Moonfleet in a CinemaScope. I think it was CinemaScope, certainly a widescreen format. And there's a scene in there where a character, one of these pirates, or wreckers I think they are, swings this huge hammer on a huge sort of handle, and it fills the screen. And it's obviously, Fritz Lang making the best of the widescreen format to convey this moment of action. And this moment with Zula swinging the staff, just the staging of it reminds me very much. And as you say, it's a very old school technique. A lot of the fighting, like the thrusting into the camera, the filling the screen with this staff that this character's swinging, feels very sort of 50s or maybe early 60s, like the Vikings. Fleischer's the Vikings and so on. But yeah. So does anybody have?
I was just on mute there. I was just getting a cup of tea handed to me. Sorry.
That's fine.
Yes. No. I agree completely. That's what I'm saying. That's why this film doesn't feel. Even at the time, it didn't feel contemporary. It didn't. It feels like an old. It feels like an old sword and sorcery, but. Yeah. But as we said, with weirdly modern elements like cannibals and blood all over the place and beheadings, and it's like, we've got to have them in because it's the 80s.
But also elements of cinematography, like the slow motion thing. Yeah, that's very.
So what you're doing is it's two magnets, same thing, magnets pushing up against each other. You can't push these together. It just can't be done. And it feels a film out of time. It doesn't. There's too many disparate people pulling in too many disparate directions for this film to ever feel coherent.
Yeah.
I just thought it was amazing. I mean, I was stunned. Not the film. The director was the same director that did like 10 Rillington Place.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, what a lineup! Dr. Dolittle, 10 Rillington Place, Soylent Green, and this.
I'm not knocking Fleischer's ability as a director. He's a great director, and he's obviously got a great body of work behind him. It just in this, clearly other people wanted to do other things with it, and it doesn't fit. None of it fits together properly. So it's a mess of it. It's a jigsaw with all the bits cut wrong and other bits thrown in that shouldn't be in there.
But like 10 Rillington Place is a mastercraft of editing and suspense and creepiness with what's being shown, isn't it? And versus this. They should have got him in it, Attenborough. It'd have been all right. It'd have been all right as a sidekick.
Interestingly, never bring in Stanley Mann. I mean, he can't no more, but never bring in Stanley Mann to do your sequel, because he also did Omen 2, Damien.
Yeah, well, Firestarter as well. I know that's not a sequel, but it's sort of.
Yeah. And he had the idea for Theatre of Blood.
I like Theatre of Blood.
I like Theatre. No, I'm not knocking Theatre of Blood. I like Theatre of Blood, but he had the idea for it. So obviously, he can come up with some interesting ideas, but don't let him write anything.
Yeah.
He's obviously got a good screenplay history, but this is. I don't know whether De Laurentiis was on his back saying, "No, make it more like this."
I think that was the case with Mann and with Fleischer. That
probably
the person that was holding the reins was De Laurentiis, and by Schwarzenegger's account and Conway and Thomas, De Laurentiis didn't have an idea or a handle on the character, and there was no.
Did De Laurentiis produce Firestarter as well? Was that De Laurentiis one?
Pretty sure. I would imagine so. Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah, I would imagine. No, he didn't actually.
Oh, did he not? I thought he did. I thought he's got his hallmarks on it.
But yeah, I mean, there was nobody of the sort of fieriness, I think, of Milius to sort of say no. Perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, the wind had blown in a direction where Barbarian films were probably not like Conan the Barbarian. I know it's only 3 years apart, but the wind had changed direction as to what they thought the audience wanted. And so it was a completely different thing, which is ironic. I mean, that Ebert review and the other one, he said, well, this could be the start of I think it's such a monumental misreading of where Hollywood was heading at the time. You had Indiana Jones coming through, and a year later you're going to get, you're going to get your archetypal modern heroes. You're going to get Rambo, Commando, and all this like a year later, and that's you've already had First Blood.
Well, so, I mean, when were the He-Man sort of cartoons stroke toys? When was all that? Because
Master of the Universe was late 80s, wasn't it?
Because that followed a similar design process, didn't it? Because it was a cartoon to sell the toys, wasn't it? But the original idea for the toy was a barbarian, with an axe and things, and then it got sanitized into He-Man.
But you're never going to say, you can't, at that point, toys were for kids. I know toys are for kids, but it was a sense of you've got to sanitize it down, and this film is a suffering of that. You either go all out and you go, but then you can let's not talk about the remake of Barbarian that came out a few years back. That's bad. But you can go all out, or you can keep it. You're talking about the mysticism. If you compare the mysticism from Barbarian to Destroyer, the mysticism is kind of in the background. It's kind of hinted at. I mean, there's a sequence where Thoughts of Doom turns into a snake, but the magic is all. What Mako's magic and the sequence where Conan is resurrected, it's there it fits in the world, whereas this is overtly has, overt wizards, overt monsters. There's a giant snake in the first one, but it's kind of a bit more grounded. The first film feels more grounded. It's hard to explain, but this one just feels like it could be any fantasy world.
Yeah, it's too hard, working too hard to build a fantasy context for the story, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. I think that.
Whereas
that
the fantasy in Conan the Barbarian is organic; it flows out of the themes, doesn't it?
Yeah, the witch near the beginning, where he gets the directions from, and
it's mysterious as well, isn't it?
That's what I mean.
It's enigmatic.
Yeah. There was something mentioning that in that review about how the first was, I can't find it, but the first was set in a particular place, a particularly named sort of world, whereas the second is just set in that world of swords and sandals genre, if you like, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. This feels like 1960s sword and sandals films with 1980s trappings on.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say. I think that's a good summation. I think we'll leave it at that. But I think before we end, we all need to have a shared declaration. So of 1, 2, 3.
You've lost it.
Crom.
Crom,
Peter.
That's where you were going.
Crom.
Back.
Crom it.
Crom.
Crom.
Crom the horn. Crom the horn. Crom the horn where the sun don't shine.
Well, it struck a bit too close. I'm reading all the 2000 AD comics at the minute, and you got.
Has anybody read the comic that they'd make about 1990 of their original idea? I've not read it, so.
I think I did way back in about 1991, but I mean it's so long ago that
I'm interested to read it now and see what the original, or see what the story, if it's better than.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can track down a copy. I think.
Yeah. Oh well, there you go. Conan the Destroyer, dog egg. I think that's where I land.
Oh.
Adrian Mills, 2021.
Conan the Destroyer.
It is written that a woman child must make a perilous journey. I want you to take her on that journey.
He has faced evil in its many forms, and has always emerged triumphant. Now, he searches for a lost treasure in the name of a princess. A search that will bring him face to face with mystical powers that could destroy him and all of mankind.
You're afraid of magic?
When it comes from evil.
This will.
Come anyway. Grace Jones and Arnold Schwarzenegger star in Conan the Destroyer.